Hey everybody, I'm here with Brian Shactman, a dear friend and also the host of Brian and Company on WTIC 1080 in Connecticut. Brian, I've been looking forward to this for weeks.
Yeah,
So
I'm
excited you're
sure.
joining me.
Listen, we had a great run when we did all that stuff for the 2020 election and the New Hampshire primary. And I think honestly, we did a show on New England Cable News called Primary Source that was just so cool because we brought in all these diverse voices and you were one of them. And we started that friendship and relationship that made it through the pandemic. And
Yeah,
here
it
we
sure
are.
did.
Yeah.
It was really for the long haul. And Brian, I can tell you this now that when I was first asked by to join the show, I was terrified and was going to say no.
You're terrified what?
I was terrified and I was going to say no.
What? But the thing is, you're so good, and this is part of our conversation today, right? I mean,
Yes.
what I thought you were like a hidden gem, and because you were so authentically yourself. And I don't know if you just said to yourself, the heck with it, I'm just going to be me, or you just found a way to put that aside. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it worked out really well.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. You're a kind person. And it's true. I called my best friend and I was like, I was just asked to do this thing. I think I'm gonna say no because I'm not ready. And she was like, you're an idiot and you're afraid and you need to do it. And it's so true because it was such a wonderful time. It was so much fun. And, we got to have a friendship with you and some other folks who were on the show. So, and it actually helped steer some of the media training that I do with folks now because, like, living it, you can talk about those experiences.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I'm so excited that you're here now because we're going to talk about media, because you are the expert. So
I would say I've done a lot, right? I mean, I've done TV, I've done radio, I've done a lot of digital work. So, obviously I didn't spend a ton of time on the biggest stages, but I've been at all levels. I've been an A ball and I've spent some time in the majors too.
that's pretty cool. Is where do you how has the transition actually been from TV to radio?
I love it.
Yeah.
I as I that show we did Primary Source, part of the impetus behind it was I didn't want to talk off a prompter anymore. I wanted to talk.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
wanted to be off script. I found one of the problems with local news, beyond the fact that most people don't watch it at those times anymore and they get information everywhere else, is that it was kind of insulting to the intelligence. It went skin deep on a bunch of different things. It never went deep enough, right? And so my goal with that show was to, and again, it was a trial and error. It wasn't perfect. We had no money, but the goal was really to try to talk to people, because I think people listen better. And this is part of what we'll talk about. They listen better when they're actually hearing a conversation and not feel like someone's reading to them. So
Yeah.
radio, it's been a transition in a lot of ways and an adjustment. But the thing I love so much about it is that I get to talk. I get to talk in this way. Like, I ask questions. And the one thing that one of my mentors told me in television when I went to CNBC, when it was more interview oriented, is follow your own instincts of what makes you curious. And
Mm.
because more often than not, that's what other people are curious about too. And so I get to pursue that. Now, are there days when I'm, talking Girl Scout cookies with the head of the Girl Scouts of Connecticut, or, the nursing home, lobbyist? Are those the sexy and most enjoyable conversations? Not always, but then you have those conversations with people you just create these bonds with and relationships with. And then I've learned that the listener likes to hear that stuff. And so
Yeah.
the transition, it's been difficult not having as much funding, and like TV, even though TV has changed a lot, is still a big operation. So I miss newsrooms and putting a show together the way a news program gets put together. But I love the freedom to just talk.
Yeah.
And diction's important. Like, I've had to work on my voice and stuff like that. But generally speaking, I've really enjoyed the ability to just connect on a non-scripted level.
Yeah. I love that, Brian, because I completely agree because with that teleprompter and the time constraints too. I mean, there are time constraints with radio as well.
Yeah.
Segment constraints, but like you don't have the same flexibility to veer off somewhere when there could be like a really relevant follow-up question, or there's like a little hole that you want to fill with some additional questions to,
Right.
to the person you're interviewing. But when it's so tight,
I know, like, well, let's have this interview be the way it should be. And I'll just tell you a few points that I probably would have made when you started some formal questions. But when I would always sense that somebody in TV was nervous, I would say a couple things. I said, I'm not Leslie Stahl. This is not gotcha journalism, right? We're here
Yes.
to talk to you. And if you have these things memorized in your head to say, and you're nervous, it's going to go south. Because the second you hiccup, then you're good. People will see you not computing in real time. And so I always sort of caution people about over memorizing talking points, because if you get yourself in a corner, it's not going to look good. And so the fewer things you can listen, if you memorize stuff or know what you want to talk about, that's different. But like, if you really have these talking points in your head and you get a little tight, you're going to screw up and it's not going to sound good.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm glad you bring that up, because that's one of the questions that when we do media training with folks, it's how prepared should you be? And, should you be memorizing things? But I agree, like that can come across as incredibly mechanical. And you fall off the rails real quick when you miss a line or you think you've forgotten a point. So how do you think, if memorizing talking points is not the ideal solution,
Right.
What do you think a person could do to best prepare for, say, a conversation with you?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on the client, but obviously you obviously have to know what you're on for and what your content is. But assuming you're an expert at it, that's not a huge problem. But you want to know your stuff, and you also kind of want to know your host and your audience. I mean, even like little things, like I'll find a connection even sometimes about somebody's past. Like, for instance, we recently interviewed like Elliot Tatelman, who's the CEO of Jordan's Furniture, and they do this big thing at the Red Sox season where they give away free furniture if the Red Sox win the World Series. Well, they did that. So now they're doing, like, if somebody hits the cycle in the last 2 months of the season, you'll get all your furniture paid for. And I was just going to do the interview about that, this and that. And then, my producer and I were talking. It's like, he just did a commercial with Rafi Devers. It was really funny. So we pulled up the ad, we looked at the ad, and, my first question wasn't about the promotion or anything. It was like, what kind of guy is Rafi Devers? Right? Like, that was part of my preparation. And it went into this whole thing where they actually ended up not scripting it with Rafi Devers. They ended up doing like 20 different spots. They had all these bonds with it. And like, it created a great conversation. And that was how I prepared. So I think that it's actually good for your guests to know the host and what the audience is, because maybe there's a nice thread there they can make. And they obviously have to know their own stuff. But the weird thing is about preparation after that is, like we said, people just need to be themselves. And I think that's a huge part of it. And we'll talk about never letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to say things perfectly every time. But when it comes to my preparation and a guest preparation, this one thing, my first producer at ESPN, who was the first person to put me on TV, and I'm not going to swear on this, although he did say a swear in the conversation, because I don't know what the audience is, but he said, I don't give a blank what you look like. I just want you to tell me something I don't know. And so I think it's really important for anybody to come to a conversation and really try to, when you talk about talking points, sometimes they're so common and they don't go deep enough. Like, really try to let people know something that they maybe didn't know before.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk a lot about storytelling as a really essential piece of when we're working with folks on messaging and talking about like their company strategy and stuff like that. Because I agree with you, where I feel like when folks have a story that people can connect with, that's way more powerful than nailing every single talking point during an interview, because it's that story that folks are going to remember. And rather than, all the corporate points that folks might want you to say, right?
And a good interviewer might start with some story about Rafi Devers, but that good interviewer knows why you're there and is going to let you get those things out. So sometimes people are so anxious about getting the things out, they'll get a question, they'll immediately pivot to what they're supposed to say. And, it changes the dynamic right away. Now, there's the risk that you don't have a good interviewer who's not going to give you that opportunity to do your thing, but someone who's good at their job knows that you're on to promote Jordan's Furniture. So of course, they're going to give you that opportunity to talk about the deal and where to get it and all this other stuff. But that sometimes is the nerves of a guest. And again, not everyone can be the perfect guest, but I talk about teaching. I was a terrible teacher, Lori. And
really, I don't believe that, Brian.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I never, and this is why it's good to be in a studio and not in front of a live audience, because I was never good at, I wanted to bat 1,000. I wanted to have every single person in my class be wrapped all the time. And it's impossible.
Yeah.
You can't have everyone's attention 100% all the time. So I was a crappy teacher, but the best teachers can get you from here to there, and you don't know that they were trying to, they were working to get you there the whole time, right? And so
Yeah.
the key for your clients and the things you do is that you want to get the stuff out there without it being so obvious that that's the stuff you want to get out there.
Yeah.
And that's where the talking points can be trouble, but also that's experience. You know, it takes anyone from host to guest a long time to be able to do those kind of things. But I do really feel like you will be able to get the things out that you feel you need to. And the hope is you can get them through a natural conversation.